I'm Robert McKay. If you've been watching these videos, you know that I made several before I thought, wait a minute, maybe I better tell people who I am. So I'm Robert McKay. I'm the guy who does whiskey for beginners, and I'm charging through as I can the list of videos that I have which provide information that beginners to whiskey might not have, and which, when I was just starting out about a year and a half ago, I wished I had all in one place. And that's what this channel is about. Today, we're going to deal with the question, how do I read a whiskey label? And it isn't all that difficult, but I didn't know when I first started what to do with the label on a whiskey bottle. And so I want to look at that today. Now, you can't see just how thoroughly amateur my production facilities are. I'm sitting here at my desk with something wherever there's a flat spot because I'm using that something. And so the bottles are down here, my hand, down here on my left on the floor. And I'm just going to reach down blind and grab one and we'll look at it. Okay, what I came up with is Balcones Baby Blue Corn Whiskey, and it's a pretty label. The amateur lighting does not lend itself to it. But this particular label contains, and by the way, a whiskey label has to have government approval. I believe they call it the Tax and Trade Bureau, the Tax and Trade something, of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And it's an unconstitutional outfit, by the way, the ATF is. There's no authority in the Constitution. And any regulation of arms is flatly contrary to the Second Amendment, but that's a whole nother deal. The Tax and Trade Bureau approves whiskey labels. Now, not necessarily the pretty design, but the information that's on a label. So, on this particular one, we have the name of the distiller, Balcones. It's Balcones Distilling in Waco, Texas. The name of the whiskey, Baby Blue. And then it's really fine print. I don't know if you'll be able to see it right there below the blue. Made from roasted blue corn. And that's information that isn't necessary to put on the label, but they did. It says pot distilled. You don't have to put that on the label, but they did. And Balcones makes a point that their whiskey comes from pot stills. And I don't know enough about stills to really do a video on that, but pot stills tend to leave in more of the flavor. And Balcones whiskey is very flavorful. Now, it has the size 750 milliliters. The metric system is a ton more logical than our American system, but I can't think in it. I'm 60, almost 63. The metric system didn't start coming into use at all in the United States, except in a scientific context, until I was an adult. It's just hard to learn a new language, which is essentially what this is. But a 750 milliliter bottle is roughly equivalent to a fifth of a gallon, and that's what I call it. I just say it's a fifth. Corn whiskey, that tells you right there exactly what this is. It's made from a mash of at least 80% corn. Balcones uses 100% roasted Texas blue corn, but corn whiskey has to be at least 80% corn. Has to age in either new uncharred barrels or used charred barrels. And so when you see corn whiskey, that's a requirement. It tells you what you're dealing with. And then it says 46% alcohol by volume right there. That's a requirement. And for those of you like me who think in proof, rather than in alcohol by volume. That's 92 proof. You just multiply the alcohol by volume by 2 to get the proof. And that's the label on the front. Some of it's legally required, or at least required by regulations. Congress, instead of making laws, sets up an agency and then says, oh, you all go make regulations, which nobody has to vote on, nobody has to debate on. They're just there. And then this little strip here is not a requirement. It says the original Texas whiskey with the Texas star in the middle. And that is the truth. Garrison Brothers in High, Texas was the first legal bourbon distillery in Texas since Prohibition. But Balcones Distilling began distilling in 2009, got their whiskey, not bourbon, but I believe it was a malt whiskey. But they got their whiskey out for sale just a little before Garrison Brothers did, so they're the first legal distiller in Texas since Prohibition. Now we come to the back of the label, and you have this bit here, which I'm not going to read, which is just information about Balcones Distilling. It's got Jared Hempstead's signature. He's the head distiller. Distilled and bottled by Balcones Distilling, Waco, Texas. And I'm not sure exactly what the regulations are on that. Personally, I prefer it if a whiskey bottle says who distilled it and where. Now, this is a requirement. Aged at least 12 months in oak. This does not on the front, by the way, say it's a straight whiskey. And the reason is, to be a straight whiskey under American regulations, it has to age at least 2 years. If it ages between 2 and 4 years, it must have an age statement. There is not a requirement to put an age statement on unless you want it to be a straight whiskey and it's between 2 and 4 years. So Balcones was not required to say aged at least 12 months in oak, but they do. That's, as far as I know, all their whiskeys have an age statement. I've not been able to check that on all their bottles. But they do it in that idiosyncratic manner, aged at least X number of months in oak. If it's 3 years, they'll say 36 months. If it's 4 years, they'll say 48 months. Because the number of months in a year is 12 times the number of years gets you however many months. It has the government warning, and it even says government warning about how you shouldn't do this or that while you're intoxicated. What all does it say? It's got it has the warning about drinking during pregnancy, and a lot of that warning would not be necessary at all if American culture wasn't a drunkenness culture. It is possible to drink this and not get drunk. Now, if you're just pour shot, boom, then yeah, you're going to get drunk. That's the whole point of that stupid exercise. But if you're just pouring a Glencairn and sipping on it for an hour or two, you're not going to get drunk. You will feel an effect, and one of the reasons I have my glass at night after work is I don't have to do any driving, but I don't get drunk. I feel an effect. If it gets to be too much, I back off. But that's the warning. It has the barcode, of course. This particular distiller puts the batch number and the date. I assume the date it went into the bottle, but I'm not sure. And that's that bottle. Being done with it, I put it back in my desk. It's the only place I have for storage. Thoroughly amateur, remember? Next, well, I find I grabbed another Balcones product. It wasn't, I just grabbed the 3 bottles out of the desk. This is Balcones Texas Pot Still Bourbon, and the light just is not good for these labels. This, of course, says Texas Pot Still Bourbon, straight bourbon whiskey. It's already said it's a Texas whiskey. To be a Texas whiskey, it must be from Texas. You can't truck it in from MGP in Indiana, which is the largest contract distiller in the country, maybe in the world for all I know, and then call it Texas whiskey. That would be not Texas whiskey because it comes from Indiana. But Balcones distills their whiskey and bottles it in Waco, and they try as much as they can to use ingredients from Texas. But it is a straight bourbon whiskey. That means, you'll remember, that it's been aged at least 2 years. It has to age at least 2 years to be a straight whiskey. It also cannot contain any artificial color nor any artificial flavor. The only thing you can add to it is pure water to proof it down to whatever you want it to be in the bottle. In this case, 46% alcohol by volume, so 92 proof. It's a fifth, 750 milliliters, got the original Texas whiskey strip. Back here, aged at least 24 months in oak, which means it could be 3 years. It could be 10 years, although I really doubt that in the Texas climate. But at least means at least. Some people, they say at least, they think it can't be more or less. No, it can't be less than that, but it can be more. So this ages at least, what does it say, 24 months, so that's 2 years. It might have whiskey in here that's 5 years old. But the age on a bottle, and when you're reading a whiskey label, remember this, the age on the bottle is the age of the youngest whiskey in the bottle. If in a particular batch you have barrels that are 2 years old, barrels that are 6 years old, and barrels that are 8 years old, then the age on the label is going to say, oh shoot, I can't remember where I started, 246, let's say that. Some barrels 2 years old, some barrels 4 years old, some barrels 6 years old. We'll go with that. Hopefully I can remember 246. Then the age on the bottle has to be that of the youngest barrels, 2 years. If you want to have a 12-year-old whiskey, the youngest barrels are going to be 12 years old and no younger. And if you put into a batch of whiskey barrels that are 25 years old, 15 years old, and 10 years old, then the age statement, if you put one on, will be 10 years. Has to be the age of the youngest whiskey. Everything else here is typical Balcones. It also says here, and I didn't look to see if it was on the corn whiskey, the baby blue, never chill filtered or colored. And some whiskeys do chill filter. They cool it down to, I think it's 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And then they run it through a filter to take out various things, fatty acids and such, which, if the whiskey gets chilly enough, come out of solution and make it look cloudy. It doesn't affect the taste to have that in there. It's still good whiskey if it's good whiskey at all, but it looks cloudy. The problem with chill filtering is that it can remove some of the flavor from the whiskey because those compounds help provide the flavor. They're part of what they call congeners. They come with the alcohol. And Balcones never chill filters a whiskey, and as long as you store it at room temperature, say, or if you have to store it in a chilly place, bring it out and let it warm up before you drink it, you won't have a problem with that cloudiness. This goes back in. And finally, the third and last bottle I'll be using for this video is a bottle of Old Forester 100. This is the first bottled bourbon, and it says so right there. It was the first bourbon, and this is actually historical fact. Some of the history in whiskey is not really history, but this is the first bourbon that they ever routinely put in glass bottles and shipped out for sale. Old Forester, established 1870. And it's amazing how many whiskey distilleries, by the way, even in Scotland and Ireland, have relatively recent establishment dates. Whiskey's been around for hundreds of years, but the distilleries as we know them are not that old, most of them. This is Old Forester, that's the name of the brand. Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey. That means it's made in Kentucky, it's at least 4 years old, and there are no additives except water to bring it to proof. It's 100 proof, by the way, and it actually puts it in terms of proof. The alcohol by volume is in small print. It tells us who it is, Old Forester Bourbon Distilling Company, and it's owned by Brown-Forman, but unlike a lot of these giant conglomerates, and Brown-Forman is one of the international giants of distilling, Brown-Forman began with the people who came up and originally made Old Forester, so it's kind of still in the family. Let's see. Continuously sold before, during, and after Prohibition. They got I think there were 6 licenses to produce medicinal whiskey. It's got some marketing stuff here. The last line is, there is nothing better in the market. There's hyperbole and advertising in whiskey just as there is in anything else. On the back we have the warning. We've got some more marketing stuff, 750 milliliters, so it's a fifth. And that's 3 whiskey labels. Now, knowing what you've seen here, having that information in hand, you can then take up just about any bottle of whiskey. You can look for how much is in there, 750 milliliters or 200 milliliters or whatever. And if you know that 750 is a fifth, roughly, not an exact correspondence, then you can know that bigger or smaller numbers are bigger or smaller than a fifth. You can look and see if it's a straight whiskey. If it is, then you know certain things about that whiskey. You can look and see if it's a bourbon. If it's bourbon, then and I've done a video about bourbon, so you can go back and look at that. I don't believe I've done one on corn whiskey, but at least knowing if it's bourbon or corn whiskey or rye whiskey, if all else fails, you can look it up online. What is rye whiskey? Well, it's this, 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 and this, and you know what you've got. I didn't bring up a bottled in bond whiskey, but if you see bottled in bond on the label or bonded, that tells you something, and you can look for these specific things. Now, there's going to be some extraneous stuff, like the advertising stuff on that Old Forester label, or the information about Balcones Distilling on those bottles. But the basics are the size, what kind of whiskey, and an age statement if there is one. If it says straight whiskey and there's no age statement, you know it's at least 4 years old. And pretty much that is reading a whiskey label. And so I'm going to quit babbling and rambling and end the video.